Baby, feeling like you own me. I'm in this time, can't believe that you can break me.
What?
Whoa, Zane. If you keep doing moves like that, I might let you go out with me.
I am the X-Slayer.
Every couple of decades, we see a resurgence of something from before, ranging from media to fashion to lifestyles, but it is an echo of what was once a way of life in the past. We see it all the time in cinema, whether it's on the nose or something that just happens to invoke nostalgic feelings in such a manner. Take two pieces of media for instance, Stranger Things and Drive. One sets itself apart into the 80s and does its best to reintroduce the looks of its people as well as the lifestyles involved. Drive was really just a thriller film, but with a memorable soundtrack that helped kickstart the retro wave scene in music, even though it's not set in the 80s at all. Both do a great job with what they accomplish, but at the same time there are a lot of imitations that ride on the nostalgic train for aesthetic purposes, without the need for a reason, so to speak. Very rarely does a piece of media that uses nostalgia as the bedrock for its result works, and like the past that it tries to recreate, it comes and goes. As we progress forward in the 2020s, we're now seeing a resurgence of 90s culture, but mainly from an aesthetic standpoint, or like a piece of an old mirror. There are many ways to create nostalgia, but each form of media or piece of its culture does so in a unique way. In cinema, nostalgia is usually pulled from a period of time in our history. In gaming, it is pulled from technology. In fashion, the clothes they wear. The further you rewind the clock, the more dated and older everything appears. Movies can show us a real-life depiction of it, or even alter certain events like in the novel, The Man in the High Castle, featuring an alternate post-World War II setting. In games, it can go far and beyond with nostalgia and experimentation in a way that movies cannot do. In the context of retro games, feelings are invoked by the display of the game's graphics, reminding the players familiar with it when it was the norm, or introducing players to what those graphics looked like, but with the application of modern controls. They generally don't suffer from the dated control schemes that people from long ago had to get used to, like with the N64 controller, or the way people play Doom with just the keyboard. We have now modernized controls and old graphics, the best of both worlds for retro gaming. As for the visual part of it, well, it's generally supported by an understanding of the culture, the feelings generated from remembering it, the rose-colored glasses approach to bringing it on display. Nowadays, we have a myriad of choices to select for our retro palette. In the 2000s to 2010s, we had pixel-based indie games inspired by the days of the NES and the SNES. And we still get them in droves, mind you. But later on in the 2010s, we began getting a metric ton of PS1 inspired games, mostly in the horror category. Just look at itch.io for instance. But when it comes to shooters specifically, or FPSs, when they apply retro, it's more or less based on a particular era of gaming. With FPS games, the earliest golden age period would be the mid to late 90s, with the likes of Doom 2, Blood, Duke Nukem 3D, Quake 1, Half-Life, Unreal Gold, UT99, Quake 3 Arena, Deus Ex, Thief, the list goes on in this category. I state Golden Age because these games represented the time where the genre was really coming into full swing. Duke Nukem 3D and Blood were the best of the build engine games and represented what sprite-based shooters were capable of at the time. Doom 2 would gain immortality through its modding community. Thief and Deus Ex applied total freedom in approaching your objectives and had multiple outcomes for certain events, with the latter also incorporating RPG mechanics. Quake 3 Arena and UT99 would become the pinnacle of intense FPS multiplayer action at the time, and its graphical achievements were monumental. Half-Life and Unreal Gold were the games that showed that you could have a well-crafted shooter with great gunplay and still have an interesting narrative and universe to explore. Everything since then has been the result of what those games have accomplished. A lot of people, including me, have dreamed about making games like these, with our yellow pieces of paper lying around with horribly drawn characters that were destined to restore order to the galaxy, or getting revenge against the guy who banged your mum and stole your dog, playing as a trench-coated badass with a bad haircut and wearing sunglasses even though it's in the pitch of night. In retrospect, these would be crappy ideas. But one game, a game so crappy but so good at the same time, would surface. A retro-inspired FPS that looks and feels like a genuine 90s shooter. The most 90s retro-inspired shooter that I've seen in a while is this game.
When I was 16, I designed a computer game in this notebook, and it was awesome. But then, it got lost. Or was it? I am the X-Slayer.
Slayer's X. Slayer's X Terminal Aftermath Vengeance of the Slayer is a shooter made by Zane, a character from the universe of Hypnospace Outlaw, a game set in an alternate 90s timeline where you explore a 90s themed internet browser full of websites and charming characters, including Zane himself, the coolest kid in Teentopia, where you're deemed either cool or lame by his own word. Slayer's X, the game, is a game within a game, technically speaking. It was a project made by the character himself as well as another character named Adam Chase using the Cataclysm engine, a fictional engine that they had used to make their game at the time. But for some reason it never got finished and it was forgotten for a long while, at least until they found the lost disc and it decided to finish what they had started. And what we have here was a game that they had envisioned when they were kids, and this time around, like I said, they had finished what they had started, and now we enjoy it in all of its glory. I've played a ton of retro shooters, and a few of them actually stand out for me, like Dusk, Herat, and Ultra Kill. But Slayer's X is also another game to the list that also does it for me, but for completely different reasons. Ultra Kill has its stylistic fusion of Doom Eternal and Devil May Cry put together fantastically, Dusk for its evolution of Quake 1's gameplay, Herat for its rooted return to Quake 1's gameplay, but with a far better setting and amazing atmosphere on top of it. Slayer's X for its fantastic display of what a kid's idealization of a 90s shooter would look like in their own head.
Mevin, what are you doing out here? I thought they evacuated town.
I don't know, Zane. I could ask you the same question. I hope your mom knows you're out past your little bedtime. I would fire you if I wasn't banging her.
Shut up, idiot!
Ridiculous weapons that seemed so cool at the time. A boss that did your mom, shooting moving poop, using glass for ammo, using what is essentially a stink bomb but as a grenade launcher, shooting 3 rockets at once, 2 pistols with sideways animations. Everything about this game quite literally stems from the mind of a 16-year-old kid, what he thought was cool at the time. From the stupid plot, to the Linkin Park infested soundtrack that you can hear in the game's awesome music, the alternated real-life setting of Boise, Idaho. The game is so crappy and it still works. The plot is that you play as Zane, made by the character Zane, who is a promising X-Slayer, a group of warriors with awesome powers that only cool people are allowed to have. Zane, Stephanie, and Mikey are training in the dojo and are then interrupted by the Psychos, universally stupid enemies that begin invading the town of Boise and also kill Zane's mom just because. As a result, he swears revenge and goes on a rampage across town, going after the Psychos with new metal music and cool weapons, including the S-Blade that has a hackblood charge.
The S-Blade has a hackblood charge.
What is a hackblood charge? Doesn't matter. It's just cool. That's all you need to know. The S-Blade, when charged, can throw a projectile at enemies while you save ammo for your other weapons. Oh, and by the way, if you're using the glass blaster and you can't find ammo, just break glass. It's in every level. The game consists of 9 levels, including some bonus ones after completing the game. The weapons have some great sprite work going for it, including the enemies. The techniques applied into their design mimics that of the enemies and weapons in 90s sprite-based games. If you've played games like Redneck Rampage or Witch Haven, where they appear somewhat janky but also distinctive, you'll also see that Slayer's X goes for the same janky feel, but mixed in with fun gameplay that is relatively simple, but still fun nonetheless. The thing with Slayers X gameplay is that it doesn't necessarily try to break new grounds in its gameplay or introduce more advanced movement options. It's just a straightforward experience, something that you would see in like Doom clones or build engine games, where you just point and shoot, jump across platforms, and that's it. If you've played build engine games, like I said, then Slayers X will be more akin to that pretty much, more so than the Doom clones. Except that it's all done through a grown-up, finishing a game he made when he was a teenager, while still applying that same mindset, injecting all of the toilet humor and teen angst that he can muster, including defined beverages like soda to wash the palate of a tasty burger, to heal him in time of need, breaking glass to use as a shotgun basically, being too cool for arcade machines.
X-Slayers don't play around.
Thinks the manager Mevin is too much of a dork to be the bad guy. And while you've been watching these cutscenes, yeah, that's another thing the game excels at. Its style of recreating 90s styled CGI cutscenes, the same kind that you would see in Duke Nukem 3D or Blood for instance. In the context of this game, it actually works well in its favour, with a personal and familiar touch to it, whereas any other game usually would do it for the sake of aesthetics or because it's retro, and retro is cool sometimes. And there's nothing really wrong with that. It's good to explore earlier applications of 2D or 3D game development, but to do so also requires a level of understanding beyond the visual aesthetic that you coat the game with, and Slayers X knows how to do it, but with 90s style teen angst and butt jokes. The humor is childlike on purpose as well as the naming of the weapons and the enemies, something that the character Zane would have thought was cool at the time, and again it works because the gameplay is fun, the setting is great, the music is awesome with its 90s nu metal vibes, great weapon designs and edgy enemies to boot. Movement feels pretty smooth and action was pretty seamless as I was playing it, with nice music transitions between being quiet to tense and finally loud and badass when the fighting starts.
I don't have time for games. Dickweed.
Ultra Kill is another game that also does the same thing with its music. When I first played this game, I could have sworn that it was a build engine game with the way it went, but it was actually made in Unity, one of the biggest engines available for indie devs right now, and the fact that it made me think otherwise shows how well in tune the developer really is with 90s FPS games as well as the build engine itself, the games that spawned from it and what made them great. Slayers X is something that may or may not work for people that want more out of their retro experiences. As for me, I have the benefit of growing up around the time period where early 3D or sprite-based games were what was available, so it was easy for me to adjust to the visuals and appreciate what it does try to do. Why does Slayers X work then? What sets it apart from a lot of other shooters beyond what I've already just said? Well, at the end of the day, it's just an incredibly well put together game with a great idea that is so unbelievably stupid and yet defies all logic and comes out on top. The game is like that joke where Boromir from Lord of the Rings comes up with the catapult idea to throw Frodo into the fires of Mount Doom. It's an incredibly stupid idea and no one wants to go for it, but it ends up happening anyway, and it works. Slayers X is like that in a sense. The game where all of the ideas we thought of when we were kids, we thought was cool, ended up getting made anyway. A lot of the games tend to have more mature themes made from the perspective of adults. Slayers X, however, is the game with a kid's mindset, made by an adult returning to his teen phase and making all of those stupid ideas come true in the guise of this game, Slayers X. That's why this game feels more unique compared to a lot of other retro shooters that I've played, that were enjoyable but not enough to give off a lasting impression in the same way that, say, Dusk or Ultra Kill or Harrot did for me. Slayers X, Terminal Aftermath, Vengeance of the Slayers, featuring the X-Slayer Zane, CEO of Big Z Studios, biggest fan of Seepage, and wielder of the S-Blade that has a hackblood charge, is the X-Slayer. Slayers X is one of those games that you don't see often, but when it does, it leaves an impression that can last a good while. While it doesn't offer the most groundbreaking gameplay in FPSs, its ability of showcasing teenage 90s nostalgia in an edgy FPS shooter is so far unparalleled, with some unique and cool weapons, enemies that are edgy in all shapes and sizes. The list goes on with this game. The fact that it is technically a game within the universe of Hypnospace Outlaw, providing an enjoyable retro shooter while enriching the universe of another game is impressive in itself. Slayers X is a simple but fun game with a storyline that makes you stupid for even trying to piece it together, and makes you feel stupider for actually figuring it out. But that only adds more charm to the 90s fest that is this game. People that enjoy that era of gaming will find something here worth trying. However, I do wish that the game had more weapons and more levels to play around in, because I was having a really good time and then it just kind of ended, like a dream. Slayers X is like the crappy shooter we dreamed about in our heads when we were kids, wishing one day that it would come true. And it is glorious. Thank you for watching.
Zane, the psychos. They found the steel sewer. Our secret base. They know about the hackblood. You must stop them. I give you the S-Blade.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Whatever you do, Zane, don't let them get the hackblood talisman. Go to the steel sewer and get it before they do. Oh yeah. And one last thing. I am your...
Mikey, no!
The S-Blade has a hackblood charge.